Emma Chen put down her coffee mug and stared at her editor with disbelief. You want me to profile Lucas Reed, the tech billionaire? Emma's voice was flat. This was not the kind of story she usually covered. Her editor, Mike Patterson, nodded with enthusiasm that Emma did not share. Exactly. Reed Industries just hit $1 trillion valuation. He's on every magazine cover this month. Emma sighed and ran a hand through her short black hair. At 34, she had built her career on exposing corporate corruption and government scandals, not writing glossy features about the ultra-wealthy. Mike, I don't do puff pieces. Give it to someone in the lifestyle section. Mike leaned forward across his cluttered desk. The newsroom of the Metropolitan Times hummed with activity around them, but his voice dropped. This isn't just about his money or success. There's something interesting happening with his factories in Southeast Asia. Emma raised an eyebrow. Now Mike had her attention. What kind of interesting? The kind you specialize in. Mike slid a folder across to her. Most tech companies there have terrible labor conditions. But word is Reed's facilities are different. Either it's an elaborate PR front or he's actually doing something ethical. Emma finished, skepticism clear in her tone. That's what you need to find out. Mike smiled, knowing he'd hooked her. You get 3 weeks. Full access to Reed himself. His people have already agreed. Emma flipped through the folder. Lucas Reed stared back at her from a magazine cover, tall, with sharp features and intelligent eyes. At 41, he had built Reed Industries from a small software startup to a global tech giant. The usual success story. Why would Reed agree to let me profile him? He must know my reputation. Mike shrugged. Maybe he has nothing to hide. Or maybe he thinks he can charm you. Emma snorted. Many had tried to charm or intimidate her over the years. None had succeeded. Fine, she said finally, but I'm not writing a fluff piece, no matter what. If there's dirt, I'm digging it up. I wouldn't expect anything less. Mike stood up. Your first meeting with Reed is tomorrow at 10 a.m. That evening, Emma sat in her small apartment, researching everything she could find about Lucas Reed. Born to middle-class parents, engineering degree, started his company at 25. Divorced once, no children. Known for being private about his personal life but outspoken about business and technology. The more she read, the more her skepticism grew. No one became a billionaire without cutting corners or stepping on others. That was simply how the world worked. Emma opened her laptop and began typing notes. Asterisk questions for Reed. Asterisk. Asterisk. Labor conditions in Asian factories. Asterisk. Asterisk. Tax avoidance strategies. Asterisk. Asterisk. Political connections. Asterisk. Asterisk. Environmental impact of manufacturing. Asterisk. She would approach this like any investigation. Lucas Reed might be used to fawning interviews and softball questions, but Emma Chen had built her career on asking the hard questions that powerful people didn't want to answer. As she closed her laptop, Emma felt a familiar excitement building. Behind every billionaire's success story was a more complicated truth, and finding that truth was what she did best. Tomorrow, she would meet Lucas Reed, and no amount of wealth or charm would distract her from her purpose. Emma arrived at Reed Industries headquarters 15 minutes early. The glass tower stretched into the sky, its sleek design announcing its importance to the world. I'm here to see Mr. Reed, she told the receptionist, presenting her press badge. Emma Chen from the Metropolitan Times. The receptionist smiled. Yes, Ms. Chen, please take a seat. Someone will come for you shortly. Emma chose not to sit. Instead, she studied the lobby. Unlike other corporate headquarters she'd visited, this one displayed photographs of workers from around the world, each with a name and short story. Interesting PR choice, she thought. Miss Chen. Emma turned to see a woman in a crisp suit approaching. I'm Diane Paddle, Mr. Reed's chief of staff. Please follow me. As they rode the elevator to the top floor, Diane explained the schedule. Mr. Reed has set aside 90 minutes for your first interview. He's quite interested in your work, particularly your series on pharmaceutical price scouting. Emma hid her surprise. She hadn't expected Reed to be familiar with her reporting. The elevator opened directly into a large office with floor-to-ceiling windows. Lucas Reed stood near the glass wall, looking out at the city. He turned as they entered. Ms. Chen, welcome. He walked forward to shake her hand. Emma had prepared herself for an intimidating figure, but in person, Reed seemed almost normal. Tall, yes, and well-dressed in a suit that probably cost more than her monthly rent, but his handshake was firm without being aggressive. His eyes were alert and curious. Thank you for agreeing to this interview, Mr. Reed, Emma said formally. Lucas, please. He gestured toward a sitting area with comfortable chairs rather than directing her to sit across from his large desk. Would you like coffee or tea? Coffee, black, Emma replied, taking a seat and setting up her recorder. She noticed Reed pouring the coffee himself instead of asking his assistant to do it. So, he said, handing her the cup, where shall we begin? Emma didn't waste time. Let's start with your factories in Asia. You've claimed they exceed local labor standards, but independent verification has been limited. Reed nodded, not seeming surprised by her direct approach. Fair question. We actually have an open invitation for journalists to visit any facility without advance notice. Really? That's not what other reporters have experienced. It's a new policy, Reed admitted. Implemented after some valid criticism last year. For the next hour, Emma pressed him on labor practices, environmental policies, and tax strategies. She expected corporate talking points, but Reed's answers were surprisingly detailed and thoughtful. Many companies move manufacturing overseas purely for cheap labor, he explained. We did it initially for the same reason, I won't deny that. But we've learned that treating workers well and investing in communities creates better products and more stability. That sounds noble, Emma said skeptically, but your profit margins tell a different story. Reed didn't flinch. Our margins are high because we make good products, not because we exploit people. Did you know our factory workers in Vietnam have full health care, education subsidies for their children, and wages 40% above the regional average? Emma hadn't known that. I need to verify those claims. Of course. Diane will provide all the documentation and contacts for independent verification. As their time ended, Emma felt oddly unsettled. Lucas Reed wasn't what she had expected. He answered her toughest questions without becoming defensive. He seemed genuinely engaged with global issues beyond profit margins. I've arranged for you to visit our research lab tomorrow, Reed said as they finished. And if you're interested, our main Asian production facility next week. Emma nodded, gathering her things. I'll be there. Walking out of the Reed building, Emma frowned at her notes. Either Lucas Reed was the most convincing fake she'd ever met, or there was more to this billionaire than she had assumed. Either way, she needed to dig deeper. The research lab of Reed Industries surprised Emma. Instead of the sterile, high-security environment she expected, the space was open and filled with light. Scientists and engineers moved freely between workstations, many dressed casually in jeans and t-shirts. We believe creativity needs space to breathe, explained Dr. Sarah Wong, the lab director, as she guided Emma through the facility. Emma took notes, asking pointed questions about working conditions and project ethics. The answers were consistently positive. Employees spoke of good benefits, reasonable hours, and meaningful work. Mr. Reed visits the lab every week, Dr. Wong mentioned. He still gets excited about the technical details, not just the profit potential. Does he actually understand the science? Emma asked. Dr. Wong laughed. Better than some of our PhDs. He started as an engineer, remember? Later that week, Emma dug deeper into Reed's business connections. In a downtown cafe, she met with Oliver Martinez, a former government regulator who now worked at a watchdog organization. Reed isn't a saint, Oliver said, stirring his tea. His company lobbies hard for favorable regulations like any other tech giant. Emma leaned forward. Any specific concerns? Oliver slid a folder across the table. Look at his connections to Senator Williams. After Williams pushed through that tech-friendly bill last year, Reed Industries donated heavily to his foundation. Emma flipped through the documents. This looks problematic. There's more, Oliver continued. Reed sits on a council that advises the Defense Department on AI technology. Some of their projects have dual-use potential, civilian applications but possible military uses too. This was the kind of lead Emma had been waiting for. Do you have proof? Nothing definitive, but ask him about Project Aurora. 2 days later, Emma found herself on a Reed Industries private jet headed to Vietnam. Lucas Reed sat across from her, reviewing documents on his tablet. Why did you come personally? Emma asked. Most CEOs would send their PR team. Reed looked up. I try to visit our international facilities regularly, and I was curious about your impressions so far. Emma decided to be direct. I've learned that you have close ties to Senator Williams, who championed legislation that benefited your company enormously. Reed didn't flinch. Senator Williams has been a strong advocate for innovation, but if you're suggesting impropriety, you should know that our donation to his education foundation came 6 months before that legislation was even drafted. And Project Aurora? Emma watched his face carefully. A flicker of surprise crossed his features. You've been thorough. Project Aurora is developing predictive software for disaster response. Yes, there are potential military applications. Most advanced technology has dual-use potential. Some would call that weapons development. I would call it responsible innovation. The technology helps predict flood patterns and evacuation routes. Should we not develop it because someone might adapt it for other purposes? Emma wrote in her notebook, unsatisfied with his answer but noting his willingness to discuss it. The Vietnam factory tour revealed more complexity. The facility was clean and well organized, with safety standards that exceeded local requirements. Workers spoke positively about conditions, though Emma wondered if they felt free to be critical. During lunch in the employee cafeteria, Emma noticed Reed chatting easily with workers, even speaking basic Vietnamese phrases. You seem to care about these people, Emma observed later. They make our success possible, Reed replied. Treating them poorly would be both unethical and bad business. As they prepared to return to the airport, Emma reflected on what she'd learned. Reed Industries wasn't perfect. The political connections and defense contracts raised legitimate concerns, but the working conditions were better than any factory she'd previously investigated. The story was more nuanced than the simple expose she had imagined writing, and Lucas Reed himself remained a puzzle she hadn't quite solved. The flight back from Vietnam stretched for hours. Emma reviewed her notes while Lucas worked on his laptop across the aisle. The private jet's quiet hum created a strange bubble of isolation from the world. Would you like some dinner? Lucas asked, closing his computer. The chef makes excellent pad thai. Emma reluctantly set aside her work. Sure, I could eat. Over dinner in the plane's small but elegant dining area, the conversation drifted away from business for the first time. How did you get into journalism? Lucas asked, pouring sparkling water into her glass. Emma hesitated. She rarely shared personal details during investigations, but the question seemed genuine. My parents immigrated from Taiwan when I was 3, she began. My father worked 2 jobs to support us. When his factory closed and the company denied severance pay, no one cared. No newspaper covered it. Lucas listened attentively as she continued. I was 12 then. I decided someone should tell these stories. People with power should be held accountable. Emma took a sip of water. What about you? Why technology? Lucas smiled. My mother was a high school math teacher. She brought home an early personal computer when I was 10. It seemed like magic. From magic to billions, Emma commented. Quite a journey. Not always a straight line. His expression grew serious. Did you know I went bankrupt with my first company? Emma frowned. This wasn't in her research. No, I didn't. I was 22, thought I knew everything. Lucas shook his head at the memory. Lost everything, including my girlfriend at the time. Had to move back with my parents. That's not in your official story. People prefer success narratives without the messy parts. He looked out the plane window at the darkness. My father died while I was trying to rebuild. Heart attack at 58. Working too hard his whole life. Emma saw something unexpected in his eyes, a vulnerability that matched her own experience. My mother got sick my senior year of college, she found herself saying. Cancer. I almost dropped out to care for her. Did she recover? Emma nodded. She's still with us. Tougher than anyone I know. To tough mothers, Lucas raised his water glass in a toast. Emma clinked her glass against his, surprised at how comfortable the conversation had become. The next morning back in the city, Emma met with her editor, Mike. "So, is Reed the villain you expected?" Mike asked eagerly. Emma spread her notes across his desk. "It's complicated. The factories exceed industry standards. Workers get health care, education benefits. But there are concerning political connections and government contracts that raise questions." Mike frowned. "That doesn't sound like your usual corporate exposé." "Because it isn't that simple," Emma replied, frustrated. "Reed isn't a saint, but he's not a cartoon villain either." Later that day, Emma received a text message from an unknown number. "Found something you might want to see. About Reed. Meet at Parkside Cafe, 7 p.m. J. Winters was a reliable source who had helped Emma on previous investigations. At the cafe, he slid a flash drive across the table. "Reed Industries has a secret division working on something called Project Mercury. Very hush-hush. Department of Defense involved." Emma pocketed the drive. "How reliable is this?" "Solid. My contact risked a lot to get this." That night, Emma reviewed the files. Internal memos mentioned surveillance capabilities and urban monitoring systems. The documents suggested Reed Industries technology might be used for domestic surveillance. As she worked, her phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. "Enjoyed our conversation yesterday. Would you be interested in continuing our interviews at my house in the mountains this weekend? More relaxed setting. My chef makes excellent breakfast." Emma stared at the message, feeling conflicted. The personal invitation seemed inappropriate given her role as a journalist. Yet she was curious about what she might learn in a less formal setting. And beneath that professional curiosity was something else, a connection with Lucas she hadn't expected to feel. Emma typed her reply carefully. "I'll be there. Send the details." She pressed send, wondering if she was crossing a line she shouldn't cross. Lucas Reed's mountain home was nothing like the mansion Emma had expected. The modern structure of glass and wood blended with the surrounding forest, more retreat than status symbol. "This is where I come to think," Lucas explained as he showed her around. "No staff on weekends except Chef Miguel, who lives in the guest house." Emma noted the personal touches: photographs of family, well-worn books on shelves, a piano with sheet music open. Not the sterile showplace of a typical billionaire. After breakfast on the deck overlooking the forest, Lucas suggested a walk. "There's a lake about a mile through the woods. Good place to talk." As they walked the forest path, Emma decided to be direct. "I need to ask you about Project Mercury." Lucas stopped walking. "Where did you hear that name?" "I have sources," Emma replied. "The documents suggest surveillance technology with concerning privacy implications." Lucas sighed and sat on a fallen log. "I wondered if you'd find out about that." "So it's true? You're developing domestic surveillance systems." Emma remained standing, her reporter's instincts fully alert. "It's not what you think." Lucas ran a hand through his hair. Project Mercury began as a public safety tool, predicting crowd movements during disasters, helping emergency services respond more effectively. The documents mention urban monitoring and Department of Defense involvement. "Yes, because some officials saw potential for surveillance. We were approached about adapting the technology." Lucas looked up at her. "I've been fighting internally about this for months." "Fighting how?" Emma asked skeptically. "The board sees billions in potential government contracts. I see technology that could be misused. I've been trying to build in safeguards, restrictions on how the system can be deployed." Emma paced in front of him. "But you're still developing it." "If we don't, someone else will, without any ethical considerations." Lucas stood. "I'm trying to set the standards for how this technology is used." "That's a convenient justification," Emma challenged. "It's the truth," Lucas insisted. "Sometimes there are no perfect choices, only better ones." They continued to the lake in uneasy silence. The water shimmered under the morning sun, peaceful despite the tension between them. "I have contract documents showing Reed Industries is already agreeing to provide this technology to 3 government agencies," Emma finally said. Lucas looked surprised. "Those contracts include strict usage limitations. Did your source include those pages?" He hadn't denied the contracts existed. Emma felt a growing sense of disappointment. Had she misjudged him after all? I need to see everything, she said firmly. Full transparency. Otherwise, my article will reflect the information I have. I understand. Lucas nodded slowly. When we get back to the house, I'll show you the complete files, but they're classified. You can't publish specific details. My readers deserve the truth, Emma said. And they'll get it, but there's national security involved. Lucas met her eyes directly. I'm asking you to be responsible about how you present this information. Emma felt torn. The journalist in her wanted to expose everything, but she recognized the complexity of the situation. Technology developed for good being pulled toward questionable uses. More confusing were her personal feelings. She had begun to respect Lucas, even like him. Now she faced the classic journalist's dilemma: how to report fairly on someone she no longer saw as just a subject. Back at the house, Lucas unlocked a home office and retrieved a secure laptop. This contains everything about Project Mercury. I'm trusting you, Emma. As the files loaded on the screen, Emma realized this moment would define not just her article, but her integrity as a journalist. The story had become more complicated than she ever imagined. And so had her feelings about Lucas Reed. Emma stared at her computer screen, reading the final draft of her article for the 20th time. After 3 sleepless nights, she had written what she believed was fair and accurate. The piece detailed Reed Industries' impressive labor practices alongside serious questions about Project Mercury and political connections. Her phone buzzed with a text from Lucas. Thinking of you today. Let me know when the article is published. Emma didn't reply. She hadn't spoken to him since leaving his mountain home 3 days ago. Their goodbye had been awkward, both aware that her article might change everything between them. You ready to submit? Mike appeared at her desk, coffee in hand. Emma nodded and pressed send. It's done. Good work, Mike said after reading it. Not the takedown I expected, but solid reporting. It's the truth, Emma replied. Complex and messy. The article was published the next morning. By noon, Emma's phone was ringing constantly. Other journalists wanted comments. Reed Industries' PR team had released a brief statement thanking her for balanced reporting, while disputing some details about Project Mercury. Around 3 o'clock, Diane Paddle, Lucas's chief of staff, called. Mr. Reed would like to meet with you, she said formally, at your convenience. Is he angry? Emma asked directly. I believed disappointed would be more accurate. Emma agreed to meet Lucas at a quiet restaurant that evening. When she arrived, he was already seated in a private corner booth. His face was serious, without the warmth she had grown accustomed to. Thank you for coming, he said as she sat down. I stand by my reporting, Emma began immediately. I know you do. Lucas folded his hands on the table. You were fair about most things, but the way you characterized Project Mercury, suggesting we're willingly enabling government surveillance, that wasn't accurate. I presented the facts as I found them. You left out the context I provided about the safeguards and my opposition to certain uses. Emma felt defensive. I mentioned your stated concerns, but the contracts speak for themselves. The waiter came for their order, but neither was interested in food. They both asked for water. My board is furious, Lucas continued after the waiter left. Some want to sue for breach of confidentiality. Are you threatening me? Emma's voice sharpened. No, I convinced them not to pursue legal action. Lucas sighed. But I thought you understood what I was trying to do, create ethical boundaries for technology that will exist regardless. I reported what I saw, Lucas. That's my job. They sat in uncomfortable silence. Emma realized this might be the last time they spoke. The thought bothered her more than it should. Finally, Lucas spoke again. You know what hurts most? I trusted you. Not just as a journalist, but as someone who I thought saw me as a person, not just a billionaire stereotype. That's unfair, Emma protested. I wrote a more balanced piece than any other reporter would have. Balance isn't the same as understanding. Lucas stood up. I need to go. The board has called an emergency meeting. As he left, Emma felt a heaviness in her chest. She had maintained her journalistic integrity, but at what cost? The next morning, Emma faced criticism from unexpected directions. Several of her journalist colleagues accused her of going too easy on Reed. Online commenters called her a corporate sellout. Meanwhile, tech industry insiders claimed she had sensationalized Project Mercury without understanding its technical constraints. Mike called her into his office. The publisher's getting pressure from some major advertisers. They're not happy about your portrayal of Reed's political connections. So now what? Emma asked tiredly. We stand by the story, Mike assured her, but maybe take a less controversial assignment next time. Walking home that evening, Emma passed a newsstand with business magazines featuring Lucas on their covers. The familiar face now felt like that of a stranger. Her phone had no messages from him. The connection they had begun to build was broken, sacrificed to professional obligations and different values. Emma had done her job with integrity, but for the first time in her career, victory felt hollow. 3 months passed. Emma threw herself into new assignments, investigating a pharmaceutical company and a corrupt city official. Her work was solid, but she felt a strange emptiness. She hadn't heard from Lucas since their last meeting, though she occasionally spotted him in business news. One morning, her editor Mike burst into the newsroom waving a press release. Did you see this? Reed Industries just announced a complete corporate transparency initiative. Public Ethics Committee, regular independent audits, restrictions on government contracts. He tossed the paper onto Emma's desk. This has your name all over it. Emma scanned the document. Reed Industries would now require ethics approval for all government projects, with civilian oversight. Project Mercury would continue, but with strict limitations on how the technology could be used. At the bottom of the press release was a quote from Lucas. Recent reporting has highlighted the need for greater accountability in how technology companies operate. We are committed to leading by example. He's basically admitting you were right, Mike said with a grin. Emma wasn't sure how to feel. Professional vindication, yes, but also a twinge of something more personal. That afternoon, Emma's phone rang with an unknown number. Ms. Chen, this is Diane Patel from Reed Industries. Mr. Reed would like to know if you're available for an exclusive interview about our new transparency initiative. Emma hesitated. Why me? Mr. Reed specifically requested you. He said you would ask the right questions. The next day, Emma returned to Reed Industries headquarters. Unlike her first visit, she felt nervous. The receptionist led her directly to a conference room where Lucas waited alone. He looked different, more tired, but somehow more relaxed. He stood when she entered. Thank you for coming, Emma. It's a professional opportunity, she replied carefully. Your initiative is newsworthy. Lucas nodded, accepting the distance she established. They sat down across from each other. I'll get straight to the point, he said. Your article changed things here. It forced a long overdue conversation about responsibility. Emma raised an eyebrow. That wasn't the response I expected after our last meeting. I was hurt then, Lucas admitted. It took time to separate my personal feelings from the larger issues you raised. And now? Now I'm trying to do better. Lucas handed her a folder. These are the details of our new Ethics Oversight Committee. 5 independent experts with veto power over any project with surveillance potential, including Project Mercury. Emma reviewed the documents. The changes were substantial and appeared genuine. What happened with your board? Last I heard, they were furious with you. Lucas smiled slightly. Let's say it was a robust discussion. 3 board members resigned, but most came around when I showed them the research. Companies with ethical governance actually perform better long-term. As the interview continued, the tension between them gradually eased. Emma asked tough questions. Lucas answered frankly. It felt like their earlier conversations, before complications arose. After an hour, Lucas asked, "Off the record now." Emma turned off her recorder. "Go ahead." "I've missed our conversations," he said simply. "You challenged me to think differently. Few people in my life do that." Emma felt her carefully constructed professional wall weakening. "I thought about our discussions too." "I'm not asking you to compromise your journalism," Lucas continued. "Just the opposite. I need people like you to hold me accountable. I can't be both your friend and your watchdog," Emma said. "Why not? The best friends tell hard truths." Lucas leaned forward. "I'm speaking at the Technology Ethics Conference next week. Would you consider joining the panel discussion with me, representing the critical perspective? Emma considered the offer. A public conversation rather than a private one. Professional rather than personal. A way to reconnect without compromising her integrity. I think I could do that, she said finally. As she left the building, Emma felt something had shifted. Not a return to what was before, but something new, a relationship built on honest disagreement and mutual respect. She pulled out her phone and added the conference to her calendar, surprising herself with how much she looked forward to it. The Technology Ethics Conference became the starting point of something neither Emma nor Lucas had expected. Their panel discussion, which many predicted would be tense, instead showcased two people with different perspectives finding common ground while maintaining their principles. 1 year later, Emma sat in her new office at the Metropolitan Times. Her recent series on tech ethics had won a prestigious journalism award, and she had been promoted to senior investigative reporter. On her desk stood a small cactus, a gift from Lucas after she mentioned she always killed houseplants. The only plant that can survive your dedication to work, he had joked. Her phone buzzed with a message from Lucas. Still on for dinner tonight. Have news about the foundation. Emma smiled and typed back, 7 p.m. Don't be late. The Reed Journalism Foundation had been Lucas's idea, born 6 months after their reconciliation. An independent organization funded by him, but governed by respected journalists and academics, it supported investigative reporting on technology and corporate accountability. Emma had initially been skeptical. People will think you're trying to buy good press. Then we'll structure it so I have no editorial control, Lucas had replied. I just provide the money. At a small restaurant that evening, they sat at their usual corner table. Their relationship had evolved into something neither could easily define. More than friendship, not quite romance, built on mutual respect and shared values despite their different worlds. The foundation approved funding for 20 new investigative projects, Lucas told her excitedly, including that international team you recommended looking into AI ethics across borders. Emma nodded appreciatively. Good, that work needs to happen. Lucas studied her face. You seem distracted tonight. Emma hesitated, then pulled out a folded newspaper. Did you see this? It was a profile of them in a business magazine, titled The Billionaire and the Journalist, an unlikely alliance. It makes us sound like a buddy comedy, Lucas said with a laugh. It also implies I've gone soft on you, Emma pointed out. That I don't critically report on Reed Industries anymore. That bothers you. Of course it does. My credibility is everything. Lucas considered this seriously. You've written 3 critical pieces about my company in the past year. And 6 positive ones, Emma countered. Because we done 6 things right and 3 things wrong, Lucas replied with a slight smile, unless you prefer we make more mistakes to balance your reporting. Emma couldn't help laughing. You know that's not what I mean. Their food arrived, and the conversation shifted to other topics, a book they both read, Emma's mother's health, Lucas's new renewable energy project. They disagreed about politics, argued about economics, but listened to each other with genuine interest. After dinner, they walked through the city park, comfortable in the cool evening air. I have a question, Lucas said suddenly. Are you happy, Emma? The directness of the question surprised her. What do you mean? Just that, in your life, in your work, in whatever this is between us. Are you happy? Emma thought carefully before answering. Happiness had never been her primary goal. She had pursued truth, justice, making an impact, but happiness. I'm satisfied with my work, she began slowly. I'm making the difference I always wanted to make. That's not what I asked. Emma stopped walking and turned to face him. Yes, I'm happy. Not in the way I expected to be. It's complicated and sometimes difficult, but yes. Lucas nodded, seeming relieved. Good, me too. Is that surprising? Emma asked. A little. I spent years thinking success would make me happy, then thinking nothing would. I didn't expect to find it in arguments with a stubborn journalist who never lets me get away with anything. Emma smiled. And I never thought I'd find happiness respecting a billionaire CEO who actually listens when I call him out. They continued walking, not touching but close, 2 people who had found an unexpected connection across different worlds. Later that night, as Emma returned to her apartment, she thought about the title of the magazine article. Can a billionaire CEO really make a woman journalist happy? The question itself missed the point. Her happiness hadn't come from Lucas making her happy. It had come from both of them challenging each other to be better. Better leaders, better citizens, better humans. It came from honest conversation and mutual respect. It wasn't a fairy tale. It was something rarer and more valuable. A relationship between equals who saw each other clearly and chose to walk forward together anyway.